Hey everybody, it's Crypto-Anarchist here, and I'm bringing you another video on cryptocurrencies. In today's video, we're going to be talking about all the mistakes that have been made since the economy, basically. Um, I'm going to talk about it's a lot of Bitcoin Cash academics here, and the mistakes they've been making. The mistakes they've been making have made me make mistakes, and none of them are retracting their mistakes. So I'm going to clean up their mess here, and I'm retracting the one retraction I made. I know it only got like 15 views before I pulled it off because I pulled it off in like 15 minutes, didn't leave it up for very long whatsoever. I'm retracting that retraction because these mistakes are not mine. They're other people's, and I'm going to clean it up because they're all making a lot of big mistakes. Okay, so if we're going to talk about the mistakes that are being made, we're first going to go with selfish mining, and we're going to talk about how Evan Gunsarir and it al. need to retract Gamma because Gamma never existed. Bitcoin Cash, it's a graph, it's not a mesh. So if you look at this picture of a graph, all the nodes here are connected in the shortest possible connections. They're all connected but in one hop. So when Evan Gunsarir and it al. say that an attacker can rush and somehow outpropagate an honest miner, when an attacker has a lead of one, a private branch lead of one, like this is completely retarded stupid. Because if you look at this here, in order for that to happen, like if you look at this, the selfish miner by definition, they have a reactive strategy because they don't know when the honest miner is going to release their block, and so they're necessarily releasing their block second. So if the honest, if all the nodes are connected in the shortest possible connections with the fastest possible connections, then that means the only way that the selfish miner can outpropagate the honest miner is if the selfish miner if his message somehow travels faster, and since they are both traveling using, like optical fiber cables or whatever, that's probably what they're using. They're traveling with photons, so that would mean that in order for the selfish miner to outpropagate the honest miner, the selfish miner needs tachyons. So tachyons don't exist, so gamma is a meaningless variable. And so this makes literally half of the selfish mining paper dog shit, and the other half of it, I don't want to like make people think all of the paper's dog shit. It's just half the paper's dog shit. The other half is beautiful. It's golden. It's great. But the half of it that talks about gamma is this half here, and I'm pretty sure this is a presentation by it al. I'm not that familiar with it al, so I can't necessarily say for sure that that's who that is. But he's talking here about how, or the network of Bitcoin here, and how if gamma increases, then then the selfish mining works even more. And if you look at this, that network is not a near complete graph. That's a mesh. That's not Bitcoin. So the fact that they get this wrong invalidates half of their paper. And the stupid thing is, in their paper, they say that a fix to Bitcoin is actually just like if there's ever two simultaneous blocks, just choose one randomly, and that actually makes it easier for selfish mining when gamma equals 0, and gamma always equals 0 because gamma is a non-existent thing. It doesn't exist because they got the wrong model here. And so Craig Wright was correct on this. Half the paper is selfish mining's dog shit. They need to retract it. Will they? Probably not. They should also try a simpler proof for non-academics. And the proof here is pretty simple. Selfish mining and honest mining, the way it works is basically, when the selfish miner gets that one block ahead, that private branch, when they're one block ahead, if they can get 2 blocks ahead, then they win those 2 blocks and they invalidate the work of the honest miner. The honest miner, though, has a different scenario. If that honest miner catches up that 1 block, then they're obviously, like we said, since gamma is a non-existent variable, the honest miner wins that propagation race, and so then the honest miner wins and invalidates the selfish miner's work. The difference here is that when the honest miner wins 1 block. When the selfish miner wins 2 blocks. So basically the way the selfish mining works is it's just necessarily better for the selfish miner because the selfish miner is adopting a strategy whereby they waste the hash power of the honest miner, and they're assuming the honest miner doesn't do anything back. Now, Craig Wright has some good answers here on the fact that it's real stupid to assume the honest miners won't do anything back, especially when it's pretty simple to understand when selfish mining occurs. Or just by examining the network hash rate and the percentage that, the blocks that the miner's mining. But The problem here is that Craig won't admit that he's kind of bad at math. I think he understands math. I think he understands the mistakes he made. There was this real famous problem that people like Craig Wright wrote a paper on, and it was a real poorly written problem. That was the whole issue with the problem. The problem was really poorly written, and so Craig sort of misunderstood it, and I think he knows now that he was wrong, but he won't ever admit it just because he's a cunt. He's just a cunt. That's just who he is. That's just the way it is. But, like I said, the reason is just at selfish mining at 1/3 they both waste an equal amount of hashes, but the selfish miner, the selfish miner is going to win more when they win than the honest miner does. And once the hash rate gets higher than 1/3, the selfish miner starts winning out a lot, because when the hash rate's more than 1/3 for the selfish miner, the chances of them getting that second block, it's more than 50%. And so all they have to do is get to that second block in order for their strategy to win. So when they are more than 50% of the size of the honest miner, they get there over half of the time. So it becomes a winning strategy. But anyways, Craig's correct. Or Craig's wrong on all this. He won't admit it because he's a cunt. But he is correct that whitelist stops selfish mining. I would say that Peter Eisen's convergent consensus might be helpful for whitelisting, although I don't necessarily know if you would want to force it upon all users. But if you don't force it upon all users, I don't know necessarily how useful it is. I need to do some more research into that to really figure all that out. Going on to our next point here, Peter Risen and Omri Sechet don't understand zero confirmation, and this goes back again to Craig Wright's understanding of the network topology. Oh, and another thing too, if we go back to Craig Wright, like a lot of people in the Bitcoin Cash community are saying like, don't listen to Craig Wright. Well, the selfish mining paper by Ide Y'all has been cited like 400 to 500 times by academics throughout the world, and the only person to ever bring up the topology problem and the fact that gamma is a non-existent variable is Craig Wright, and so he's one out of 500 people, and we're talking about like the smartest academics in the world in the cryptocurrency space. Not necessarily smartest, but some of the smartest. And obviously, like the smartest are in there, but not all of them are the smartest, is what I'm saying. But anyways, the only person to understand this is Craig Wright. So people who think that Craig Wright shouldn't be listened to, like you shouldn't be listened to because you're a fucking idiot. Craig Wright says a lot of stupid shit. I understand that. But the things he gets right, nobody else gets right, and you have to understand those things or you don't understand Bitcoin. But if we're talking about zero confirmation here, Peter Eisen and Omri Sechet seem to assume that if you are a merchant, you have to check all the nodes all the way around the world in order to verify a transaction on the Bitcoin network, but that's not true. In order to verify a transaction on the Bitcoin network, you only have to verify nodes that might be or that could possibly carry out an attack. Okay, that's why they say zero confirmation. You don't necessarily want to use for very high transaction or amounts, because then someone might actually be incentivized to double spend that transaction via like a Hal Finney attack or something like that. Okay, and we're not going to talk about Hal Finney attack. We're just going to be talking about double spending transactions at the exact same time, because that's the only way that you double spend low value transactions, because Hal Finney attacks are not useful. They're not economically viable for low value attacks. So for low value attacks, there's two ways for a double spend to occur. And you have to understand that since Bitcoin Cash uses the first seen rule, whichever transaction is propagated first, and when you mean first in real time, not just because obviously if you have one transaction propagate on one side of the earth and one transaction propagate on the other side of the earth simultaneously, they'll reach different nodes at different times, because that transaction propagates through the network, not instantaneously. It's like 1/2 the speed of light. That's what optical fiber cables basically do right now. The fast ones do like 2/3, I think. I'm not entirely sure what the industry standards are for those. But anyways, the two ways of doing this attack are, one, you release two transactions basically simultaneously, where your fraudulent transaction that you want to be reversed is released slightly behind your honest transaction. Okay. Now there's still a problem here that we talked about with the selfish mining attack that's related to this. Is how does we'll get to that later. I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, so let's first, we'll talk about this scenario where you release both of the transactions simultaneously on opposite ends of the earth within a few milliseconds. Okay, so the only way you can do this double spend attack is if you can predict when your transaction is going to occur. Okay, so if I'm doing a digital transaction, can I predict when that digital transaction occurs with some degree of certainty? Yeah, you can. So maybe digital transactions, they need to be protected from this type of attack, but that's not the type of attack we're going to be talking about here, okay? Because the type of attack we're going to be talking about is the 20 millisecond transaction, one that Peter Risen and Omri Sechet keep making fun of Craig Wright for. Craig Wright says you can, for certain transactions, you can validate them in 20 milliseconds, and that is true because let's examine, can you do this sort of attack where you do two transactions simultaneously from opposite sides of the earth? Can you do it on a retail transaction in person? Okay, so what I'm asking here is, like, let's say you go to Walmart. Is there a chance here that you can do a double spend attack where you simultaneously publish the attacking transaction on the opposite side of the earth just before, like a couple milliseconds before you publish the transaction on this side of the earth? And remember, Craig Wright's saying here that you only need 20 milliseconds. We said before that the speed that messages travel through optical fiber, it's half the speed of light. That's 150 kilometers a millisecond. So in 20 milliseconds, if there was a double spend transaction, at a geographically or at a node within 3,000 kilometers, your node will know. So those are all the nodes that you're checking. You're checking all the nodes within 3,000 kilometers. So just remember that. Now, if you're able to do a fraudulent transaction on the other side of the earth that reaches this transaction, or if you're able to do a double spend transaction on the other side of the earth, that you don't think will have reached this transaction within the 20 milliseconds, you're assuming that that transaction has not been, or has not traveled 17,000 kilometers from the other side of the earth, because it's 20,000 kilometers. That's half the circumference of the earth. But minus the 3,000 kilometers that you've checked in either distance in the 20 milliseconds that Craig is giving you. So 17,000 kilometers divided by 150 kilometers per millisecond, which is the speed light travels through optical fiber cables, is 100 and basically 15 milliseconds. So Craig is saying for retail transactions, you cannot predict within 115 milliseconds the time in which this double spend, or within your transaction will occur, okay? And I would say this is true because if you go into Walmart, what are the chances that you can predict within a couple or within 115 milliseconds when your transaction will occur? And think about all the money and time and effort you have to put into this, okay? And you're never going to be able to do it because it ultimately, if I'm at Walmart, when my transaction occurs, it's completely up to the register or the cashier, okay? They're the one who finalize it, not me. I don't finalize it. I just, you sign something, they're going to finalize it, okay? And so they get to choose whether or not to, or it gets accepted. Now, obviously, they can't wait like 5 minutes and just let you walk out the store with the goods before they try and get the transaction accepted. But you obviously, as an attacker, cannot predict when this transaction is going to occur. So you cannot do this. You cannot do this attack where you predict on the other side of the world when your transaction is going to occur. And then you propagate that message immediately. The only type of attack you can do for this double spend attack is a transaction where you are geographically close. Now, let's assume that you run into the same problem that we did with selfish mining. The selfish miner, if they're geographically close, they run into the same problem that if the honest transaction goes out first, the honest transaction, it won't propagate, or it propagates before the selfish transaction, or before the double spend transaction, okay? So it won't ever, the double spend transaction never wins. And so Craig is just saying here, if you check within, 3,000 kilometers, you know for a fact that nobody's trying to double spend, or if you check within 20 milliseconds, you know for a fact that no one within 3,000 kilometers has sent any sort of transaction to your node about another transaction, or about that double spend transaction, okay? So you've already got that much cover on the earth. So how on earth is somebody going to out propagate you now? Like, how are they going to out propagate you? Like the chances of them outpropagating you are very low. I don't know where he gets the 99.998% number, but obviously if I cannot predict in a retail transaction within 115 milliseconds when my transaction occurs, then it can't be double spent. Okay, we know that. Now, I guess he's saying there's a 99.998% chance that they won't be able to predict within 115 milliseconds when their transaction occurs. I don't know where he gets that. I don't know. I don't know how you do that math. Like I said, some of his statistics isn't the best, so maybe don't trust him on this. But you can do zero confirmation transactions for transactions that are where the buyer does not have any control within a very high degree of specificity the time at which their purchase occurs. Okay, so you can only double spend a transaction. You know, without a high, or you can only be unsure of a transaction's not being double spent after 20 milliseconds if the buyer has control over when they purchase, because then they can, simultaneously spend another transaction on the other side of the earth without having to send a signal. But if they have to send a signal, then they're limited by the speed of signals, and they're going to lose that propagation race anyways. Or so, Craig Wright's correct on this, that you don't need to wait a full, Omri Sechet says 500 milliseconds for zero confirmation. You can do a lot faster than that. Not for all transactions, but you can do it for some. Do you need to do it a lot faster? I don't know. Is 500 milliseconds fast enough? I think so. I don't really know. 500 milliseconds, like half a second, that's fast as shit. So do you really need to go as fast as Craig is saying? Maybe some people want it. I don't know. It's up to the people who use the application. That's why we have competing software applications. But the final thing that I want to talk about here is Vitalik Buterin and Joseph Poon and sort of the blockstream fools, the Bolsheviks. Vitalik Buterin, I don't consider him to be a Bolshevik. He's a communist, I would consider to be usually a syndicalist. The problem with syndicalists is they don't police the Bolsheviks, and then the Bolsheviks end up doing what happened in Russia, and they kill all the syndicalists, and so the so-called good communists all die out, and then you're left with the terrible ones. But anyways, Vitalik at Deconomy admitted that the routing problem for Lightning is NP-hard. He said that the solution is a heuristic, and so for those of you who do not know, a heuristic, it's just a basic approximation. So he's basically saying we're just going to basically do a best guess. Well, the problem with this is that heuristics, especially for routing, they may not work at scale because routing gets exponentially harder as you scale to higher and higher levels of use. And the problem with this is that the heuristic algorithms, they're just approximations, but the approximations get less and less accurate as the problem becomes harder and harder, because it requires exponentially more calculations, and they're limited in the number of calculations they can do because they want it to, everyone to run a node. And so the problem is that it's a scaling solution. Lightning is a scaling, the SegWit version of Lightning, because Bitcoin Cash is its own version of Lightning called Bitcoin Thunder or T-Chain, I don't remember what it's called. Emin Ferrer, he released it or whatever. But anyways, the Lightning network with SegWit, it's a solution that is sold as a scaling solution, but it might not scale. It uses a specific type of algorithm that's going to be less and less useful the more that it has to be used. So the other thing I want to talk about here, though, is that the solution that you're going to use is, it's not actually going to be a heuristic. Like, that's going to be the initial solution, but then they're just going to keep on centralizing the network into a hub and spoke model. That's what they have to do. So they're just going to centralize the network, and that's what it's going to be. And so at first the solution is a heuristic, and then second it's going to be a centralized network. And then Bitcoin, not only will it not be it's supposed to be a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. It's, the SegWit idiots already crossed off the cash bit, but they're going to cross off peer-to-peer when then they go to the hub and spoke model, and they're going to have to. That's the only way it's going to work, and that because they're not going to try and pretend like you can't, or they're not going to, like, if they can't do routing, they're not going to stick to that approach. They're just going to centralize, and then they're going to say, oh, it's not centralized because anyone can use it. It's like, well, whoever controls the Lightning hubs who route the transactions, they can censor anybody. They can control the network. But yeah, Joseph Poon then stood up and he's like, I'm the author of the lightning paper, and I straight up don't understand anything you just said. It's like I'm not an author of the lightning paper, and I understood what Craig said. I know he says it badly. His speaking skills fucking suck, but his understanding of Bitcoin is basically unmatched. Like I said, he's the only one to point out the fact that half of the selfish mining paper is complete dog shit. Like I said, the other half's really beautiful, and Craig won't tell you the other half is beautiful. I'll tell you it is. Half of the selfish mining paper is dog shit, half of it's beautiful. Half of Craig Wright's defense against selfish mining is beautiful, half of it's dog shit. That's the way it goes. And this is, again, like I said, or I don't even remember if I said this at the beginning, but you can't have one development team control one coin. This is why Bitcoin SegWit's going to die off, because when that development team makes a mistake and they commit to it, they kill the coin. If we had Craig Wright just completely in control of the coin, he wouldn't be trying to adopt measures to help stop selfish mining. You know, selfish mining is an issue. It's an issue that can be worked around. It's not a huge issue. All you need is information about who's selfish mining and then whitelisting. It's pretty easy to do. You know, so we don't want Craig Wright just in complete control, especially because some of his statistics aren't that good. We don't want Peter Risen and Omri Sechet in control, because they're going to try and limit the usefulness of the coin and the zero confirmation stuff, because they don't understand the topology of the network all that well. You know, Evan Goons Ferreira at AL, they don't understand the topology all that well either, and they were making mistakes on that. You know, don't ever trust just one developer. You have to listen to all developers and then try and figure out where their mistakes are within each of them. And then the final thing I want to talk about is just the blockstream censorship. I think we're getting to the point that the understanding of the censorship that's going on with Bitcoin that's going to be what kills Bitcoin SegWit, because who wants to be associated with a coin that's mentality is the mentality of a bunch of it's just Bolshevism. That's what it is. It's like, oh, hey, we don't care about truth. All we care about is using violence and intimidation in order to ensure that people who are stupid buy our coin and make us richer. It's like, you guys are a bunch of fucking faggots. Blockstream and Samson Mao or whatever, they're like, oh, let's censor Craig Wright. Why would we censor Craig Wright when he's the only only person in crypto that brought up the fact that half of the selfish mining paper is crap? He's the only one. One out of thousands. Okay? Craig Wright stands alone. I know he's a cunt. I know he's a cunt. I get that. Whatever. But he stands alone. So, you know, be good or be good at it. And Craig Wright is good at it. He's a cunt, but he's good at it, you know? So let him be. I'm not saying be friends with him. I'm not even saying necessarily invite him into these conferences. I think Craig should send somebody else, you know? I think his boy Jimmy Wynn or whatever, I think he kind of understands what Craig's talking about. Maybe send Jimmy to these conferences instead. But I don't know. Anyways, that's the end of this video. I hope this helped elucidate some of the mistakes that are being made in the community right now. Again, I want to stress the fact that Bitcoin Cash, like the developers in Bitcoin Cash, they're the only ones who even acknowledge these issues. So, you know, I'm really bullish on Bitcoin Cash. Things are going pretty good for Bitcoin Cash right now. I've said before, I could see Bitcoin Cash hitting a ratio of 0.4 by the end of the year. I don't like to do price predictions that much because they're kind of meaningless just to a large extent, but I could see it happening. If it does happen, though, like if Bitcoin Cash starts rising a lot, that could be really bad for a lot of crypto. So I would recommend maybe, you know, even if you don't believe in Bitcoin Cash, maybe just have a little. Because if things go good for Bitcoin Cash, they could go bad, real bad for everything else. Real bad. But who knows? You know, who knows? I don't really know. That's why I said I don't really like to do price predictions that much. I like to stick to the fundamentals. That's what I'm good at. And the fundamentals on Bitcoin Cash are super strong. If you guys haven't been paying attention, the privacy protocol on Bitcoin Cash, it's being updated to the extent that it, like, from what I'm reading on the Oblivious transfers, it might have some like Monero-like privacy. It already has better than Dash mixing, and it might have like Monero-like privacy. You know, that's massive. Craig Wright also released something called Nakasendo, where basically you're going to share your private key among multiple people in such a way that you need all aspects of the key in order to use the key. This again sort of reminds me of ring signatures in a certain way. This isn't a privacy protocol, it's a security protocol, but it would mean that in order for an exchange to get hacked, the exchange would have to, or the hacker would have to hack the exchange and all of the users. So hacks would still happen, but they would be way more limited, way more limited. Things like Mt. Gox would never occur again. That's massive. Like all the people who lost money in Big Trail for Nano or at Crypsy or Mt. Gox, all those people, like they're gonna look at Bitcoin Cash and it's like Mt. Gox can never happen again. Like that alone, like those are some of the biggest things I've seen in crypto. Like this is the what's happened for Bitcoin Cash in the past 6 months has been like the most exciting month or 6 months in crypto, and basically everyone's missed it because of all the censorship that's gone on. And so Bitcoin SegWit and those Bolsheviks over there are in for a rude awakening because censorship doesn't work for this specific reason. It's not that you trick anybody else into the truth. You trick yourself. You believe that other people are never going to figure out the truth, but the truth is that once other people figure out the truth, you just trash your reputation forever. Bitcoin SegWit, you know, I'm not saying it's necessarily dead here and soon. It'll last for years probably, but things are not looking good. Let's put it that way. Things are not looking good, especially with Emin Sarir releasing Bitcoin Thunder or T-Chan or whatever he calls it, T-Chain. I can't remember. But Bitcoin Cash now has a version of the Lightning Network that's like Bitcoin SegWit's Lightning Network, except it keeps the graph network topology of Bitcoin, which is huge. That's the main issue I had with the Lightning Network is that it's a mesh. You want a graph. The T-Chan it's a graph, and then T-Chan, you know, you can do it on you can be offline. You can do it on mobile wallets. You can do hundreds of thousands of transactions on a decent computer per second. It's insane. So Bitcoin Cash is now releasing its version of Lightning that's better than Bitcoin SegWit's version of Lightning. And for anybody out there who's a fan of Bitcoin Cash, I won't go into the details yet because that's a whole nother topic, but the Bitcoin Cash version of Lightning, like all the things that are bad, everything that people say is bad with the Bitcoin SegWit version of Lightning, Bitcoin Cash doesn't have those. Okay, it's a complicated thing, but T-Chan that Emin Sarir has released, it keeps the network topology, keeps all the fees to miners. It's not a fractional reserve system. It's perfect. It's just perfect. But everything in Bitcoin Cash, like it's all coming together. It's all doing very well right now. Obviously, when the price jumps, don't get too bullish. You don't like necessarily put all your money in right now. But I'm still buying Bitcoin Cash. I still like Bitcoin Cash. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. There will be more coming out soon.